It says we're live. You know, I'm always suspicious of technology when it says you're live and you're like, but am I? Am I really? And what does it mean to be alive, Nick?
It's a big question. I was just talking to somebody to say, like, what is being without coffee? And I just don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, what is being if not becoming? Other fun questions. Oh man. Okay, so I got this new. I'll tell everyone when we actually hit record. All right. So, there we go. But for those of you that are hopping on, holler at us and let us know where you're at. And also, those of you that send in questions for Garth, great. If you have them and you haven't sent them in, you can leave them. But this is going to be fun. I am excited now. Let's see. Okay, it looks like, is it working? Yes. There we go. Okay, it is actually streaming, Nick.
Hooray.
I'm going to leave a message for myself and see if it works. Where it said, look at it. Oh, it says I'm a Facebook user. Why? Look at this.
Somebody from Tucson, Arizona, Facebook user.
Yeah. Let's see.
Calgary, Canada.
Calgary. Nice. That's nice. We got a sup. Oh, we got Tucson. Let's see what else we got going on over here.
I said Tucson.
Good evening from the Netherlands. Yeah. I went to Bend, Oregon, future location of Theology Beer Camp. Look, Ty, here's the thing. I would love to do beer camp all over the place. If you're friends with breweries there, where they're like, you know what we want to do? We want to sponsor a bunch of people day drinking, doing theology. Then holler at me. Hey, which, by the way, all of you that are on here, we're all going to be at Theology Beer Camp. So you may be saying to yourselves, what is Theology Beer Camp? Now, take all the nerdiness of a theology seminar, and then all the hype of a crazy youth retreat. Throw in day drinking with craft beer. Swirl it around, and boom, that's what happens. Hey, it's Steven. He'll be on here next week, right?
Oh, Steven, yeah.
Or is it the week after? Okay. Awesome. Which, by the way, you don't want to just listen to the audio of Steven's lecture in the group. You want to go watch the video because his PowerPoint slides are on point.
He's on the 29th. I lied.
29th.
I didn't want to freak out Steven.
Okay. Sorry, Steven. I just have like when they are. Yeah. So a couple other things. After the class is officially over, we're also got some. We're going to keep doing streams to hang out and discuss, either celebrate or loathe Rings of Power, and we got a number of different Tolkien heads visiting. Like the first session, Kevin Smith, the musician, will be here. Brian Zahn is coming one week. Maybe the kids are leaving my house. I see a car moving out. But right before we started, there was a 4 or 5 year old yelling poop, running up and down the stairs. So we're doing this earlier because we didn't want John asleep, but hopefully he has not fallen asleep because he. All right. So until he pops up, let's like actually hit record and stuff. And now that people are all, we got Minneapolis, Albuquerque, Pittsburgh. Exciting.
Todd talked about Bend, Oregon. That's also where the last Blockbuster is.
Ooh, are they gonna make a comeback though?
You know, they popped up on Twitter again the other day.
I know, you saw that.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? Nostalgia or people like, that's it. I'm undone with all these streaming things. I just want to walk around and find random available VHS cassettes and
run into your neighbors, to your classmates.
Yeah, sitting there to see what's getting returned if you can grab it before they can.
Totally.
Yeah. Did I show you what I found?
No.
Recently, I've been unpacking because we just moved, and I found the old school Lord of the Rings VHS.
Oh yeah.
No device to watch it though. So I was just like, it's just a tease. It's just a tease. I have to find.
You got to, man.
Go ask grandparents. Be like, who has a VHS tape? And they're like, we have it to watch the videos of you when you were a baby. Oh, okay.
You're like,
right. Nick, you should reply to the email that I sent a little bit ago with the link for John just to make sure he sees it.
Yeah.
And then we can start recording. Because, you know, he likes your emails better than mine because you're cooler.
Maybe.
You can't even take a compliment. What is up with that?
Thank you. I am bad at taking compliments. That's something.
It's a growing edge.
It is a growing edge.
All right. Well, we'll have to throw in a couple more in the next. If any of you have anything nice to say about Nick, we're going to have him practice taking compliments. You should send it to Nick. If you want to send him a DM, slide into his DMs with compliments. I mean, like, there's no one else I want to get my lore dumps from.
If you make them over the top sexual, I will receive them better.
Oh, that's the kind of. Oh, look at this. This is what I'm talking about. Nick has a wonderful smile. Look, a whole Trinity Lutheran Church sent that.
Wow.
Like a church said you have a nice smile. And you know, Nick is the bestest. Whoa. Look at that. Take the compliments, Nick. Nick rocks. Look at this. All the affirmation just flying all over the place. Oh man.
I don't know if you can tell over the internet, but these cheeks, I can feel the warmth just popping up in the cheeks.
It's hard to see because of just like your beautifully organized, trimmed, and handsome beard. Look at that compliment, just throwing it right there.
I do take care of the beard.
Yes, you do. All right. You ready for me to hit record? Because then I'm going to hit the air horn because that's fun. Oh, by the way, everyone, Jason is still in his treatment. For those of you who don't know, he's written a book about it. So this isn't me spilling beans. Jason Michelli, who's normally on here, had his maintenance chemo treatment today. And then the whole thing has gone longer than expected. So he may show up. We don't know. He was supposed to already be back. But, you know, if you're, for those of you that know, now you know. If you didn't, there you go. But also, if you are the kind that hollers at the Holy Ghost, you can say something nice for Jason. If not, outsource it to Nick because he's nice.
This is probably my favorite. Rivals Duran's. I'll take a Duran beard compliment.
All right, I'm gonna hit record now.
Okay,
there you go. Oh yeah, you heard that. I'm gonna do it again because Nick's beard's on point. Rivals Duran's. That's what the Facebook user says. Oh, it's Tolkien heads. That is right. And today, we're doing it early. Why? Because we anticipate being joined by the one and only John Garth, who, if you're alive, so not dead people, and you were like, who is one of the greatest living Tolkien heads? You would say John Garth would be on the Tolkien head collection. Not that, like we're just going to sculpt his head or anything, but if you're collecting Tolkien heads, the greatest.
John
Garth.
little Tolkien head chibis. John Garth has got to be in your chibi collection.
Yeah. And for those of you just listening, that silky smooth voice right there, that's Nick. And how are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing so good, dude. We started off before the live stream, before we hit record. I had many compliments on my beard and my facial features, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
Well, you should be. You should be. Now, one of the things that's exciting about the Rings of Power coming out, whether or not it's going to be all my hopes and dreams have for it or not, is it gave us reasons to do some nerdy stuff together for people who like Tolkien. And when we were trying to decide how we're going to spread the word that we were going to do this, because Homebrew, my podcast, we do lots of classes, but you know what they're usually about? Philosophers and theologians, right? Like we're like, do you want to spend a month and a half with the head of the Kierkegaard Society talking about the 19th century Danish existentialist? That is what we normally do. Or, well, Alfred North Whitehead, 20th century philosopher of science and religion thinking that through his work. Yeah, we could do that. But I was like, Nick, I want to get nerdy and do Tolkien. But we had to bring in people to join who are specialists and are academics in that area, because no one's paid me to teach Tolkien classes. I just read it dramatically to my children and hope that they too have Middle Earth as their second favorite narrative. So anyway, one of our goals in doing it, we're doing a giant Tolkien book giveaway. And Nick, you know what I want to do?
Tell us.
I want to show them what the grand prize gets.
You're gonna induce some jealousy.
And yeah, maybe this was originally for the grand prize, but I ordered another one because I want it. And I know I can't win my own giveaway. So look at this, the Lord of the Rings Folio edition. Now, I have children. I know that what people love on the internet is unboxing, and the volume has to be really weird. Do you hear that? Oh, yeah. You like that, Nick?
That is some Folio Society ASMR goodness right there.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Oh man, it might be almost as beautiful as your beard, Nick. I don't
think my beard can touch that, dude. Honestly, I'll just admit it. You got the Old English runes on there.
Oh, look at this.
Describe it to us.
Look at this. Well, you got this maroon casing, Lord of the Rings. Let's see here. Ooh. Look at this. Look at this. Ooh. Wow. Look at this binding. Look at that pretty. Oh, it's so nice. So nice. Oh, yeah.
Steven is saying that we're being a little irreverent right now.
Oh. And it has like sweet art in it. And it's just it smells like a high quality book. That's what I'm talking about. On the inside, you got the quality map right here.
Oh, that is great.
And what's crazy is what's in it. What's in it is actually Lord of the Rings. So like you already know the quality of the text is good. Now this is like the best looking version I've ever seen. So if you're in the class, there's a link to the giveaway. If you haven't done it, you should enter, because obviously we have preferential option for people in the class. Plus, you get extra entries if you talk someone in to entering, then they enter. But you also get 3 entries because they entered. Plus, you get 10 extra entries if you're in the class. So everyone in the class should obviously enter said giveaway, because like
what have you got to lose?
Well, you get the opportunity to stare at them, and they just
Yeah.
Like you might call them precious. And
It
now I'm
may
just like,
cause you to live for 500 years. And
whoa, 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 whoa! I don't need my butter spreading that thin, Nick. All right, so now let's do our lore dump corner.
Okay.
Because John's not here yet, and I'm hoping he isn't asleep.
I hope that he's also not asleep.
I know, but he picked this time, so I think he's good.
Yeah, I think he's awake.
I'm optimistic, but you know how it is. I did lots of these streams at 1 a.m. when I was in Scotland, because it was like much earlier in the US. So anyway, for those of you who don't know, Nick has been doing Lore Dump Corner, and these are little bits of lore that will help you impress your friends at the water cooler as conversations come up back down like because Rings of Power's on TV. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that movie. And then you're going to say, well, have I told you about the creation story in Middle Earth? Why? Because Nick told you about it in Lord Up. But did you know that Sauron wasn't the first baddie? Really? What is this? Yeah, that's the kind of excitement. Yeah, dwarfs came before the elves. You didn't know that? Now you do, because that was part of last week's Lore Dump Corner. And yeah, before we had a long excursus in dwarven eschatology. If you missed that,
You need to go back, because
Yeah.
Dwarven Eschatology is the best.
All right, Nick, tell us what's up.
So this week we are going to talk about the sun and moon, and my little title for this lore dump section is that there were two trees before there was a sun and moon in Middle Earth. And you might be asking yourself, aren't there trees all the time in Middle Earth? Why are two trees? No. So these two trees were actually the sun and moon before the sun and moon in Middle Earth. And specifically, the sun, the tree that served as the sun in the Undying Lands of Valinor in the first age, which we talked about, where the Valar live, is named Laurelin, has golden leaves, and intermingles with the light of the silver tree named Telperion, which serves as the moon for Middle Earth at this time. Basically for the whole Earth, not just Middle Earth. And Telperion, the silver tree, is actually the great granddaddy, pappy of the white tree of Gondor. So it's a symbol of royalty and elvishness and purity and goodness. So even before that, there are two lamps that the Valar put up that serve as the sun and moon, and Melkor comes in and destroys them. The Valar are super sad, and one of the Valar, named Yavanna, who's the wife of Aule, the father of the dwarves, starts singing, and the two trees pop up, and we have light once again in Middle Earth, or in Arda.
The the trees and becoming the moon and the sun. You also, in the movies, if people have only watched movies, they may think, oh well, the elves obviously have some connection, I guess, to stars, and then there's lots of names that get used. But if you don't know, if you haven't read the book, or I don't know, you're the kind that when everyone starts hanging out and singing songs in the middle of Rivendell, you just skip those pages, then you may not know. Like, how would you describe the kind of the ongoing relationship of a role of light in the bigger picture, and the way it plays out, right? Like in with the elves, and obviously Frodo carrying the light with him.
Yeah, I mean, perfect. Light is huge in Tolkien in so many different ways. If you see in even the Rings of Power, some of the promotional material, you can see swords from Numenor that have the sun on it, And so actually humans, men in Tolkien's world, the first time that they awake is with the first rising of the sun. So at some point the trees die because Melkor destroys them with a giant spider named Ungoliant, who is the great great grandma of Shelob. And so from the last fruits from
Shelob
the two
is the
trees,
spider.
Shelob is the spider, a
yeah.
dirty nasty spider. And who is also destroyed by light in the movies, or at least assaulted by light. She's not destroyed. But so the two trees get destroyed, and they basically produce fruit in their last moments of being alive, and those become the seeds of becoming the sun and moon. And so over time, so we have the sun and moon. The humans are known as children of the sun, kingdom of the sun, and the west, Valinor, the undying lands, basically are a beacon of light for enlightenment, for immortality, for purity, for goodness, for transformation. And this comes through even with the stars, like you said in the movies, with Sam fighting the giant spider Shelob with the star file that Galadriel gives, which holds the essence of the star of Eärendil.
Yeah.
So,
and you know what stars make me think of?
Tell me.
Like an all-star Tolkien head like John Garth. Look at that transition, Nick.
It's beautiful.
Oh yeah. How are you, John?
I'm all right, thank you very much. How are you?
Oh, well, I mean, if you, I don't know, or kind of like very much into like J.R.R. Tolkien, and you've read a whole bunch of books about Tolkien, and then all of a sudden you're just talking on the internet with like the John Garth, like you're probably doing pretty good. So that's how I'm doing. I mean, hopefully you don't regret this whole thing by the time we get done. But
right, I don't understand the excitement. I talk to the John Garth all the time.
Oh, and what's your favorite thing about him?
His daughter and his wife.
Oh, well played. Well played. So, now we've been collecting questions because people in the group all got to check out your lecture, which was, if I was marking it, John, like I'm going to have to get a second person to check my marking because they don't like it in Edinburgh if you give over an 80. And I was like totally going to give it over an 80. And for those of you in the US, 80s don't happen in the UK marking system very often. You get questioned. They're like, "Are you sure this is publishable?"
I had a history teacher who gave marks out of 23 for some reason. And once, when I was 18, so I was at the end of my schooling, he gave me a 22, and he said, "Well, I was tempted to give you a 23, but on principle, I've got to leave some room for improvement. So I'll take that."
That's awesome. So there's a couple questions we have been asking the different guests that I want to ask you. And then after that, we have questions people sent in. And I know Nick has things he wanted to ask you about. But the first one, and try to control your excitement, because this is a quiz. You have to decide 3 characters, John, from any part of the legendarium. You have to pick the character you would want to go to the prancing pony and drink with, the character you would want to count kills with at the Battle of Helm's Deep, and then a character other than Sam you would want to journey to Mordor. So you had to go prancing pony, Pound Town buddy, sidekick at the Battle of Helm's Deep. And who does John Garth want walking with him to Mordor?
Turin Tarambar at the Prancing Pony. I think he could do with the company and a bit of cheering up.
I love that answer. John wants to extend some hospitality that Tarambar deserves.
And at Helm's Deep, his father. 70 times he cried as he slew orcs at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, so I think he'd probably do pretty well at the Battle of Helm's Deep. As for traveling to Mordor, I think I've got to say Sam Gamgee. I mean, who does it better?
I know that's why I should have said we were making people not pick Sam because it's like the cheat code. It's like,
all right, hang on. Let me think about this. Am I carrying the ring? This is the crux.
Yeah. Well, see, I guess you could go either way. Because see,
if I'm not carrying the ring, then I'm easy. And let's take another one from the Silmarillion, Beleg Cuthalion. If I'm carrying the ring, I've got to be really careful because someone too powerful. No.
Yeah. Look at that. All right. So at the end of this, we're gonna collect all the Tolkien heads selections for this, and then we'll see who's the most popular selections. But those are high quality kills. Now, okay, if people have only watched the movies and you just name names they don't know, and they're Silmarillion characters, lure them to go check it out. Like, what are they missing, and maybe what could end up showing up in the new TV show and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, none of these are going to get into the new TV show. They're all in the. So the best place to meet them actually is if you read the Children of Huring, which is Tolkien's fullest telling of the story of Hurin and his children Turin and Nienor, and it's actually Tolkien's most tragic story. And it always appealed to me as a teenager, and clearly this is all off the cuff, but clearly it still appeals to me quite now. Yeah, I can give you Lord of the Rings only answers if you want, or second age answers if you prefer that. Do you want to try me again?
Oh, now look at this! This is well, let's do it. What do you think, Nick?
I think we should go for it. Give us the second age and the Lord of the Rings answers, John.
Okay, Prancing Pony. Now you've got me. Gil-galad. I don't know why, except I know it would be convenient for him. Apart from the time factor, he doesn't have far to commute to get to Bree from Lindor.
Very true.
Right, and he is obviously one of the figures that you want to learn from, right? For example, I'm sorry to go back to the Silmarillion, I'd want to know who his father was because Tolkien couldn't make his mind up. Helm's Deep. Yeah. Well, Elendil, he shows his worth, doesn't he, in battle? And journeying to Mordor, well, Galadriel. You're going to need a file of Galadriel. I don't know if she had one at that stage, but it would be, a nice touch.
Yeah.
These are like some top level. I feel like those are like the top shelf. The top of shelf.
I am John Garth. I'm going to use my privilege.
So when you were, when did you first fall in love with Tolkien in not just the reading it sense, but the becoming a super nerd? Most scholars have a figure or two or a time period or a big question, that they pour hours and hours of research in to get to the point that then you're distilling it and organizing it in compelling ways to others. Do you when was it that you found Tolkien to be a subject, that kind of called out that kind of energy and investment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I became a Tolkien fan at 9 when I read The Lord of the Rings. And I became a nerd very soon after that because I just kept rereading it and figuring out, because this was 1975, right? And there were no guidebooks of any kind available to me, so I spent a lot of time figuring out Elvish from the resources I had available. That's fairly nerdy. Now, much later than that, 1996, when Christopher Tolkien completed publishing his 12-volume History of Middle-earth with the peoples of Middle-earth, I felt bereaved because these books had been coming out more or less year by year ever since I became an adult, basically. So I decided to take my Elvish nerdiness a step further and create the ultimate Elvish dictionary, which would mean a dictionary that not only gave you the meanings of Elvish words as we find them, but also told you at what stage in Tolkien's development of Elvish those words came from. And it meant analysing the chronology of composition that Christopher Tolkien presents in the History of Middle-earth. This 12-volume series shows the development of his father's imagination, his father's creation of that world. It's not an internal history of Middle-earth, it's an external one about Middle-earth as a work of art, a work of craft by his father. So the end result of this was actually nothing, because I spent about 2 years creating a database, and then I got sidetracked into looking really closely at what Tolkien did in the First World War, originally as part of the same investigation, but very soon as an investigation in itself that was worth doing. So that was 96, 97 for the database, which no one has ever seen. And then 98 onwards was when I became, as you call it, a super nerd.
So what was the moment where you wanted to move? Like, what was that distraction where you were like, okay, I'm investigating the life of Tolkien here in World War I. Now I'm just going to do a full deep dive.
I had found a very small fanzine, a small circulation fanzine published by a couple of members of the Tolkien Society in Britain, called The Life and the Ancestry, and all about Tolkien. And it only ran to, I think, 2, maybe 3 issues. And I thought, well, why don't they do a 4th issue with my, a little article about Tolkien's First World War experiences. I sat down to write it, and I was a little bit too thorough. So when I stood up again 3 months later, I'd written 44,000 words. So that was my realization, and I showed this to various friends in the Tolkien Society. I have to name David Duggan and Charles Node as the key figures here who told me, no, John, this is not an article, this is a book, and really encouraged me to take it further.
Mm-hmm. So when you publish Tolkien and the Great War and it takes off, you had the opportunity to introduce the biography of Tolkien to thousands of people in a whole host of different settings. One of the perks of writing a book about something you love is that if it goes well, you then get to talk to people about it, and then answer questions over and over again that people find interesting when they engage the work or hear you lecture on it and such. In that experience, are there a couple features of Tolkien's biography or life that stick out as things that the newly attentive find fascinating, want to ask follow-up questions or get stuck on? And yeah, this might be like a lure to get anyone that hasn't already purchased your book to go check it out. But I love hearing what scholars find when they're presenting the thing they worked on in front of people. Like, what resonates? What do people ask in follow-ups?
Obviously, people start reading a book called Tolkien and the Great War, The Threshold of Middle-earth, because they want to know the connection between the First World War, 1914 to 1918, and Middle-earth. And I seem to have provided an answer which people find compelling and persuasive. And that's partly because it's quite nuanced. It's difficult to put in a nutshell. It's many different strands of influence coming together. A world war, is a vast thing that impacts on people in all kinds of ways. To give just a few examples, it makes you feel like you might not live very long. So if you want to do something, you get on with it, right? That clearly affected Tolkien. It makes friends draw closer together. And I tell the story of the friendship between Tolkien and the Tea Club and Barovian Society, his friends from school. And I tell that I believe, in a very compelling and moving way, drawing deeply and closely from the letters that they wrote to each other, which I think provides the real heartbeat of the book. So that's two examples. A third one, I just, going right back to that business about putting the composition in order. Because I tell the story in chronological order, I provide a little history of the very beginning of Middle-earth, and it's like watching the foundations being laid and then bricks being built up from scratch, from nothing. And I believe I've probably done as good a job as anyone could do on that. I have to say, I'd like to be modest, and I am generally quite modest, but I'm really proud of this book. I don't know how the hell I wrote it.
Well, it seemed, I think you should promote. I mean, it's still like the seminal history book for the past 20 years, basically. It's had it on lockdown. And it sounds like when you were writing it and you just had that experience of just, sitting down and standing back up, looking back up and having 44,000 words. I mean, it sounds almost like a mystical experience. And I guess
can I say something?
Yes,
I've got to
please.
say, all those 44,000 words were thrown out and utterly rewritten. That was just the first draft, and the second draft was a wholesale. I actually left it for a couple of years, came back to it once I got a publishing contract. At which point I realised, this really is serious. People are actually going to see what I'm doing, and I've got to raise my game higher than it's ever been raised before. And I worked really, really hard on it.
Was there a similar experience, or was there something completely different with your new book, The Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien?
Similar in a way. There's lots of very thorough scholarship in there, lots of research that I've done, actually including stuff that goes right back to material that I left out of Tolkien and the Great War because it ended up not being a book that was meant to cover the Lord of the Rings. So the stuff about the places of war, the chapter "Places of War" in the Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien contains material that goes right back to when I was writing Tolkien and the Great War, so nearly 2 decades earlier. I actually wrote Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien in about 7 months.
Oh wow!
And that was pulling together various bits of research I already had, but also doing fresh research, and of course writing almost all of the prose, almost all from scratch, and hardest of all, actually structuring the book. It was a really complex thing to structure because I wanted to cover a load of ground. I wanted to cover topography, right? Forests, sea, mountains, rivers, lakes, and waterlands, right? But I also wanted to cover craft and industry, war, and other sort of thematic things. So, pretty much anything you want to talk about in Tolkien falls into something topographic and something thematic. And I had to constantly think, so which of these chapters am I going to write about this thing in? It was quite mind-blowing or mind-numbing at times.
There were a number of questions people sent in after watching your lecture, and there are 2 different ones specifically about friendship. Sandy, her question went like this. I was familiar with Lord of the Rings. I love the image of friendship running throughout it, and was struck by the way so many different friends shaped Tolkien's own life. As someone who's new to learning about the life of J.R.R. Tolkien, I'd love to hear John reflect on the role of friendship and its power as John understands it.
I think that that we wouldn't have Middle-earth without Tolkien's understanding of friendship. It was partly built in conversation with friends. the TCBS, the Tea Club and Barovian Society, whom I mentioned earlier, regarded themselves as contributors. Quite what form that collaboration took, I think, is very, very difficult to pin down. Well, almost impossible to pin down. It's a matter of guesswork. There's certainly no evidence that they wrote anything and sent Tolkien drafts. I think that would be certainly not the case. I think what happened is that he used them as sounding boards for his ideas. And being young, enthusiastic, and very, very intelligent men, with some crossover interests with Tolkien, they were able to help him enrich his ideas, maybe steer him away from things that weren't working, you know, the kind of things that friends will do in a conversation. And later, I think that C.S. Lewis and Christopher Tolkien especially had some of the same kind of impact in Lord of the Rings. I mean, there's a couple of tiny examples there we know about. C.S. Lewis said that Tolkien ought to cut down a little bit on the Hobbit talk in the early chapters. And Christopher made sure that Sam Gamgee remained Sam Gamgee and was not renamed Sam Goodchild, which his father wanted to do. So these are points of detail. Now, the other aspect of friendship, of course, is the emotional one. And I think that the best way to gauge the importance of this to Tolkien is to think about his portrayal of friends separated on different battlefronts in Lord of the Rings, and the anxiety they feel for each other, the devotion they show to each other, near or far, together or apart, and reflect on the fact that Tolkien had that experience with his friends on different battlefronts in the First World War.
The one of the things that strikes me about even the role of friends in the narrative of Lord of the Rings is that, you know, no one really anticipates the friendship of Frodo and Sam being able to sustain and unravel this huge story that, you know, when it came out, most people didn't know anything about Silmarillion, let alone that this is this giant story. And I wonder if there's a sense that, or maybe you could put it this way: how did his early friendships and the way they were broke apart, sundered, split through war, not all of the friends make it through, like, how did that shape and impact the way he understood the sustaining power, say, of friendship in times of trouble and struggle?
When you read these letters between the friends, you can see them becoming more vigorous in their opinions, more vocally supportive of each other. You can see the deep impact of bereavement, because two of them were killed. You can see the survivors talking very, very frankly about their love for the man who's gone. So all of that definitely comes through. I think Sam Gamgee is a different case. Tolkien said in a letter, and I'm going to quote there's a version of this which is published in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, but there was a version and that was the draft that Tolkien kept. The version he sent came up for auction a few years ago, and the phrasing is very slightly but importantly different. So Tolkien said in that version that he sent, and he sent it to a fellow First World War veteran called Cotton Minchin: "My Sam Gamgee, as you recognize, is a reflection of the privates and my batmen that I knew in the First War and recognized as so far superior to myself." So, key point, he's talking to a fellow veteran, and therefore he's being frank. He can be frank. There was, often is the case that people returning from war find it more difficult to be frank to people who've not been in the same situation. And it's clearly the case, too, that Tolkien was much more guarded in talking about his inspirations when he was talking to members of the public or the press whom he didn't know. He could be more frank when he knew and trusted the person he was addressing. And the second point is that he says, my Batman. Now, Batman was an officer's servant, basically the Sam Gamgee, who helped sort him out from day to day with his many needs, practical needs, cooking, fetching, shining shoes, laying out clothes, all of that kind of thing, which an officer was, either privileged enough or busy enough to require and merit. And clear, we don't know the names of Tolkien's Batmen. We know nothing about his relationship with them. But whatever it is, it's distilled and reflected some way in Sam Gamgee, and presumably in his relationship with Frodo. And I think that's really profound.
Yeah. We had a real specific question sent in about this. Logan Isaacs in the group, he is a veteran and does a lot of work for working with soldiers that come back dealing with moral injury and such. And he asked, I'd love to hear Garth's thoughts on military service in relationship to the church post World War I, whether Tolkien or Lewis faced stigma as veterans as they forged writing careers. I definitely faced an uphill battle with how my experience is used or abused in the modern American context. And curious if Garth has a sense to the extent to which Tolkien faced stigma or bias that made his storytelling difficult.
That's a hard one to say with Tolkien, because his storytelling after the First World War and for many years was private. So he basically shared almost nothing publicly until The Hobbit was published in 1937, 19 years after the end of the war. I'm quite certain he wasn't stigmatized for what he wrote in The Hobbit, except by his fellow academics and maybe a few other people who thought it was childish and he should have been busy studying, writing about his academic disciplines. But there was definitely an animus, a problem arising between people who had been in the war and a younger generation who were not in the war, who felt that on the one hand, they would rather leave it behind and party. This was the 1920s. And on the other hand, that it had changed the world radically. So there was no going back to the old ways. And C.S. Lewis satirizes this very effectively in a book called The Pilgrim's Regress, his first published work of fiction, where it's an allegory about a traveller, and the traveller visits a town where a group of people live called the Clevers. And they are basically modernists who are reciting surrealist poetry and talking about the mud and the blood of the trenches of the First World War and how they've impacted upon them. And the Lewis character, the central character, says, but hang on, how can this have had an impact on you? You weren't there. That was your father's generation, So, and I'm sure that Tolkien and Lewis shared, they were on the same side of the fence. They felt that there had been a reaction against aspects of the First World War ethos, the sense of duty, heroism, honor, patriotism, which had helped to motivate many of these young men to go into war. And tied to that, the bonds that they formed with one another, which were harder to pin down in words. And that all of these things were being disrespected and to some extent maligned by a wave of disenchanted war literature that came along about 10 years after the end of the war, with books like All Quiet on the Western Front, Robert Graves's Goodbye to All That, and then there are many books of the same kind. There was a whole wave of them, and they had a huge impact on the public imagination, the public view of what the First World War had been. It changed from something where there had been heroes into something where there had only been suffering.
It kind of your comments on that, John, just kind of, especially now with the Rings of Power coming out, that there's just so many different versions of Tolkien. And even in Tolkien's own life, what he experienced as a young man going into the war, preparing for the war, enlisting, and what happened afterwards, and then the cultural shifts of what happens and people's viewpoints changing, and even Tolkien's own experience changing as his son, is in the Royal Air Force in World War II. So I guess for people who are trying to navigate, especially with all just the loud noise of Tolkien's this way, Tolkien's that way, or belongs in such and such a camp, do you have any advice for people who are trying to navigate the waters of how do I find maybe not like the immutable Tolkien, the true Tolkien, but basically to find stuff out there that resonates as true about Tolkien?
So reliable biographical information. I would go to. There's a number of pretty solid full-length life biographies. The obvious one is Humphrey Carpenter's J.R.R. Tolkien, a biography that was published in 1976 or 7. And it was authorized. So Carpenter's actually the only biographer who's had really extensive access to the family papers. So that's quite a short and really readable book. And there have been more recent ones. There's one just called Tolkien by I'm going to forget the names here, Raymond Edwards. And there's a book by Colin Duryea called, I think, Life and Legend. I'm sorry not to have the facts at my fingertips, and inevitably I recommend my books. The fact is that in reality, the picture that we have of a historic figure is liable to be molded and sculpted by different people. And you've got to be careful who you trust over this and look to people who've done their research. The story isn't finished. Hopefully there will be further biographies of Tolkien, maybe with fresh access to papers that are not around now. And there's always little nuggets of information emerging. I'll tell you one point that has really risen up the charts of importance for me is the sense of Tolkien as an entertainer. So I have concluded from looking at his early writings that he used parody as his way into serious writing. He would take an epic poem and then write a humorous spoof of it. And then later on, he'd be seriously writing epic poetry. That's one example. And he was famously, he acted as a character called Mrs. Malaprop in a play with his school friends. Mrs. Malaprop is, she makes mistakes in her use of English when she tries to be too clever. So, for example, she might talk about someone facing serious alligators that they've committed a crime instead of serious allegations. So Tolkien did this, and it's very funny, I think, to think of Tolkien, the great linguist, acting as someone who makes mistakes in English and also acting in drag, which presumably he did. So that's I love that. and then also personally, I was told the story by someone who was a very well-respected historian, so I trust his account. His name is Hugh Brogan. He's no longer with us, but he told me that when he was a child and a fan of The Hobbit, Tolkien visited the Brogan family home where they had a rather lovely staircase, and he performed a party trick without warning. He fell down the stairs, arms and legs flying, and got up at the bottom perfectly all right. And I think that just shows, as I said in the podcast, what lengths he would go to entertain. And I think that underpins, some of the really serious craft that he put into his writings. No one tried harder to make fantasy believable.
So the Jessica just asked this question, and there's a couple that were sent in about it. It's really Tolkien's reflections on war. And she asked, do you think Tolkien's view on World War I or war in general changed between the wars? Others asked questions about how the narratives that shape Lord of the Rings are they tools for us to reflect on the human predicament in his time or not? Like, how do we wrestle with those kind of big themes and questions that are there in wrestling with things like war, and how does his own history and stuff change the way he sees it?
I'm not sure that I would say his attitude towards war changed between the First and Second World War. I think the big change came when he went to the Battle of the Somme and saw war for itself. So there's a key point here that you can find, well, in Tolkien in The Great War, right? I write about it, but you can find it in his early lexicons of his Elvish languages, his Elvish language Quenya, which he began crafting in 1915. And he makes up names in there for the Germans, and he makes it clear that these are barbarians or possibly even monsters, right? However, when he returns from the Battle of the Somme, that element, that facet has gone completely. Those names remain, but there's no connection between them and the Germans. So I construe from that, like many soldiers, he actually realized that the ordinary soldier on the other side of the field was no better or worse than he was. The difference in the Second World War is simply that Tolkien was not able to be a combatant, and that's a different kind of suffering when other people, and especially your own children, are going to war, and you feel in a sense powerless to help. And I think that is perhaps reflected quite strongly in the fatherly roles we see in The Lord of the Rings. We've got those two great counter examples of Denethor and the way he treats Faramir, and Theoden and the way he looks after his nephew, even Merry. He's a nurturing figure, whereas Denethor is very, very hard on his son and sees him as a perhaps inadequate tool of war.
Is there, when you think of Tolkien, in some sense, people resonate with all that's contained in the legendarium, even if they don't know it, right? Like, part of the reason Lord of the Rings is so striking is it gives us a world that is attempting to be as thick and rich and complex and twisted as the one we all live in, and yet there's a kind of potential in it that I think increasingly in modernity we are more and more conscious and aware of the problems we face, and it feel like we have less and less agency to make a difference, be it, say, the ecological crisis, or the way war shows back up again, and these types of things. One of the things I really love about Lord of the Rings is the way it can acknowledge the giant stories that are complex, rich, and full of predicaments, and affirm the power of people being faithful to the good in front of them, and that you can be responsible for your own actions and what you say and what you do, and in some sense they're trusting that there's something more at work in it. And I wonder, I mean, do you have thoughts on that? Because that's one of the reasons that there were a bunch of different messages people sent, wanting to know why do you think the legendarium and the story of Lord of the Rings remains compelling, when so many of the biographical bits about Tolkien aren't shared by people that resonate so deeply with the universe he's describing?
I'm sorry, you've lost me.
Oh.
No, I heard you. I didn't follow your last point about
that there so many parts of Tolkien's biography, being in war, being devoutly Catholic, having memories of being in the country and an attachment to it. Like, there are all these experiences that he had, that less and less people have them, and yet the picture resonates in a deep way with people.
Yeah, the simplistic reason it resonates is, well, two, he's working on a mythic level. He's created something that seems to be timeless. It's set in a time that is none of our times, and therefore is kind of accessible to us all, in the same way that, we can all feel that the Shire is our spiritual home, perhaps, even if we live in, whichever part of the world. We just recognize that sense of community. So that's that kind of timeless myth approach that he has. Now I've forgot. I was going to make 2 points there. It's always fatal to say so at the outset. That's the second one has slipped. I did want to go back to a point you made very early on. You said that now we feel as though we got less agency. I would say that in Tolkien's lifetime, people felt they had no agency either. All of a sudden there's a First World War. Well, they didn't say that, obviously. All of a sudden there's a great European war, and there was nothing anyone could do about it except get involved, or, pretty much. I think that Tolkien's another aspect of the myth making approach, and again I talk about this in Tolkien and the Great War, is that it requires you to stand back to look at the big themes. Yes, you can write in detail about some particular heroes' adventures and provide novelistic insight into what's going on in their minds through conversation and things like that, which he does a great deal in The Lord of the Rings. But at the same time, you've got to stand back and look at the big themes. And what Tolkien does, he looked at the First World War, and obviously what he was really looking at was a battle between Britain and its allies on the one hand, and Germany and its allies on the other hand. But that's not what he wrote about. He wrote about a war between good as he saw it and evil as he saw it. And good as he saw it, it could be summed up as a sense of belonging in the world and respecting the world, and making things in things that are useful and beautiful, that celebrate the world. This is kind of the Elvish ethos, aesthetic, ideal. All of those things, of course, Tolkien felt were had the divine stamp of approval. They were backed up by Iluvatar in the story as the great creator, and everyone beneath him is what Tolkien in his great lecture on fairy stories calls a sub-creator, or they can be. And the world is the gift that Iluvatar, God, has given everyone in it. So we have that on the good side, and then on the evil side, we have basically the opposite all of that. The desire to have power over, for its own sake, for your own sake, the desire to exploit, the urge, the inability, maybe, to judge anything except for its material value. So Smaug, lying on his hoard, knows the value of everything in it, but not its use or whether it's beautiful. He doesn't care about those things. So yeah, that's the what you need to do in myth making. You've got to stand back and see the bigger picture, and that resonates with us. And I think that's why we can apply it, for example, to any kind of conflict. We can perhaps see ways of applying, Tolkien's many stories to pretty much any conflict. And I'm talking about, war, but also emotional, political conflicts. And people are very subjective about how they do that, as we know. People of all kinds of viewpoints feel that Tolkien's on their side, which is probably a good thing. Actually one thing that unites us all.
And I guess too, because you kind of moved from this like universal resonance that people have, or what possibly contributes to that universal resonance that unites us in loving Tolkien so much, and bring it to the subjective experience. So I guess from your time as just like, spending all these years kind of diving into Tolkien, explicating on his history and influences and things like that, like how has those things, like what does that mean for you now, like in this time, as far as like Tolkien and why it resonates so deeply with you?
I think that it's helped build my sense of right and wrong, simply put, and of the things I value. I mean, you read something like this at 9, it's going to have a profound effect on you if you allow it to. And I did. So the things I really value are, the natural environment, the rights of people, love and friendship, and it all seems a bit cliche when I'm listing it like this, but it feels that it's been enriched and deepened by my experience of reading Tolkien. So yeah.
No, that's. I think a lot of people would say similar. I know in my own experience in reading that my own moral landscape was shaped and transformed through the writings of just from the Lord of the Rings and the rest of the Legendarium. So thanks for sharing that.
Can I add something here? And I
yes,
don't know
please.
how appropriate this will be or how welcome it will be to your audience, but I'm not a believer. So, I mean, this is an important point. I think that Tolkien has been perhaps my conduit to an awful lot of wisdom that I might not otherwise have encountered, because I don't read the Bible and I don't go to church,
Yeah, I've used Lord of the Rings stuff in teaching philosophy of religion a number of times with undergrads, because like it's not like everyone's in the same religion, and then some are in none, and if you start focusing on one, people go in their tribal allegiances rather quickly. And I think one of the gifts the Legendarium gives is someone who gives this like ginormously rich and compelling world, and then these narratives that you can get caught up in and ask the big questions humans have asked in cultures everywhere. Like, what does it mean to be human? How do you live before you die? What is good? What is virtue? What is the nature of friendship? Where does love come from, and what does it look like enacted? Like the things that the big myths and stories that are parts of wisdom traditions have asked. They, especially because of the negative legacy, I think, of religiously inspired colonialism, people don't always have open ears to trust the wisdom of those traditions. And then you find in something like Lord of the Rings, someone who has inherited them, but also wants to go like, no, these are the questions that make human life better. You're a better neighbor. You're a better friend. Like, you have moral fiber in difficult times when we wrestle with stories that force us to ask these questions. Like, and you know, as a professional philosopher of religion, like, I'm much more invested in people learning to ask the big questions that have generated beautiful humans and communities than, you know, proselytize for like one particular version that, you know, you could tell the history of where it emerged and how it's changed. And that's why I love, like, that's why I've always been a different kind of fan of Tolkien than, you know, C.S. Lewis, though technically I'm a Protestant minister, so I should, you know, I guess be down. But no, I think you're right. There's something very, very there's a kind of wisdom in a rich fantasy literature that if you don't harness the narratives that can shape wisdom traditions, you don't get around to asking very often.
Yeah, and since you mentioned Lewis, I'll say that he, until he found religion in 1931, he told Tolkien, you know, I love myths. They resonate with me. And he was a philosopher, you know, so he was also concerned with right and wrong. And it was Tolkien that said to him, well, you know, myths are just myths are in some way glimpses of what they of the true faith, you know. So that's a kind of parallel, I suppose.
Yeah. Now, Nick, I know you're about to ask a question. I just wanted to make a parenthetical comment for everyone in the group. Like, one of our goals in doing this, like, and now Nick and I and Jason, all three of us are Christians, but usually Christians using Tolkien we find obnoxious. So part of structuring the class was having people in different locations. So we also have Buddhist Tolkien scholar on here, a queer Christian Tolkien scholar on here. Like, part of the goal of the class is to recognize that in our historical moment, especially in the West, we need to have stories that, one, bind us in friendship and provoke us to ask important questions. Because as a species, if we can't figure out how to ask and wrestle with the right questions, Mordor is going to win. So, you know, I just want to say that, like, because I think I want to appreciate you sharing it, but I know people in the class will have none in all sorts of different faiths. And it was important to us that the questions, the deep questions that animate Tolkien were the center of it, as opposed to anyone appropriating it for their own means. Unless you're going to appropriate Tolkien for being a Christo-fascist or kind of like alt-right superhero for Western civilization or any of that.
Well,
they can go suck a lemon.
If you do that, you're not reading Tolkien.
Yes.
You're being very, very selective in what you see in there.
I'd say amen, but you know. Yeah.
One thing that strikes me, talking about, again, to mention Lewis again, and I mentioned earlier that Lewis was one of those friends who helped in a kind of collaborative friendship to encourage Tolkien to write. I know that he said that you couldn't influence Tolkien. I think that's a moot point. Look at the work of Diana Glyer, The Company They Keep, and Bandersnatch, two great books, if you want a really careful discussion of this kind of influence question. But the fact is, Tolkien was writing his stories primarily for an immediate audience, which was largely made up by C.S. Lewis through the 1930s and through the composition of The Lord of the Rings. C.S. Lewis and Christopher Tolkien, those were the two main readers. C.S. Lewis was not the same religious belief as Tolkien. He was a Protestant. Tolkien was a Catholic. So if Tolkien were writing solely as a Catholic and requiring you to be a Catholic to appreciate and understand his message, you know, Lewis would have had a few words to say to him. It didn't work like that. Tolkien wanted to write something that had much more of a universal effect and applicability. And he said in his foreword, the second edition of The Lord of the Rings, he's not writing an allegory. Allegory, that is a kind of coded story with a very specific, only one meaning that you're supposed to take from it. Allegory resides in the purpose domination of the author, by the author, whereas applicability resides in the freedom of the reader. Now, he's writing a book about tyranny. He has to believe that the author must not be a tyrant to the readers. The readers have to be free to take it where they want to take it.
Man, I love that. I don't think I've heard it quite articulated that way, and it was beautifully done, John. Too, just thinking of the friendship that Tolkien had with the TCBS, and then even with the Inklings and different perspectives, and still being to enjoy each other's works, and just thinking about Lewis, you know, almost being moved to tears by some of Tolkien's early drafts. Like for you, as somebody who's approaching Tolkien, and all of us who read it from all these different perspectives and different times and histories, and all your time you spent with Tolkien, like what are we've asked this to a couple people, but like what is it when you revisit Tolkien, whether it's The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Silmarillion, other works, like what passage do you look forward to? Like what is one of those passages that really invokes that for you?
That's really tricky, you know, because what moves me most tends to take me by surprise. I often reread, not for pleasure, but because I'm researching or I'm preparing class materials. And I will suddenly stumble upon something that I've not noticed before. So, you know, very early on, I would have said the arrival of the riders of Rohan at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and the horns ringing in the hills. Or I would have said Éowyn revealing that she's not a man face to face with the Lord of the Ring wraiths, and I still find those passages really moving, so that I would probably really struggle to read them aloud without blubbing. I give classes where I read out passages, and I've often chosen passages like the Grey Havens I was reading out last week to a class, and I struggle like hell with that. But one example that really took me by surprise fairly recently was noticing how Sam Gamgee, very early on in The Lord of the Rings, says, I can't remember the exact phrase, but roughly this: those Black Riders had better not come here looking for trouble again, or they'll have Sam Gamgee to reckon with, right? And what I love about that is that actually when Tolkien first wrote it, I'm not sure what from the top of my head what stage in the composition Tolkien wrote that line. But if you look at the full narrative, actually, you know, Sam does more or less effect their complete destruction.
Because wouldn't it at some point in the construction of it, the riders weren't going to be the ring wraiths at that point, right? Y'all two know more about this than me, but what at one point it was going to be Gandalf at some point during the Fellowship?
Yeah, but the point where Tolkien thought of the ring wraiths, or thought of a sinister hooded figure on a horse, was when he was writing a passage about the hobbits traveling through the Shire, and they hear horse hooves coming around the corner, and they hide, and lo and behold, it's Gandalf, right? And Tolkien scrubbed that immediately and wrote the scene that we know, with no real sense of what this figure was going to be. At that stage, in fact, Sam Gamgee didn't exist. He wrote Sam Gamgee into the plot only when he carried it as far as Rivendell. So it's a really complex history, actually. But what I love about that line of Sam's early on in the book is you know, we are prone to chuckle at him. You know, he's a funny character. You know, he has no idea what he's dealing with, and then the book turns it around, and they're the ones that have no idea what they're dealing with. And I think that's really moving, and it's about that. That's gets the crux of what Tolkien says about the power of, you know, the small people in the world to move big things.
Yeah, I never ever thought about Sam saying those lines and then, you know, really embodying the ennoblement of the ignoble, and Sam's the epitome of that.
So now let's each have one last question, Nick, and I know one question that has come up and it's been debated in previous gatherings, and Jason, who's not here because before you got on, John, our third member is currently going through chemo treatments and it went long, and so he's not here. But we had a small argument. And by that I mean an ongoing text chain that also members of the class have joined in, where he thinks that Tom Bombadil is an unnecessary character and a sidetrack, and I just can't even think of, like, I mean, what is the term heresy invented for if not such statements? So since we have John Garth here, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Tom Bombadil, and maybe since you know, like, you could witness to Jason on behalf of those of us that recognize how wonderful it is to have an excursus with Tom Bombadil in the Fellowship of the Rings.
I love the Bombadil chapters, the Old Forest in the House of Tom Bombadil and Fog on the Barrow Downs. I think they're a little mini symphony. And I'm so glad that they're not in the movie, because I can stay with my own reading of them. You can hear the music all the way through. There's the drip of water and the crack of the twigs, and then there's the whispering song, the sleep song of Old Man Willow, and then there's Bombadil's, you know, "Hey, come merry doll, derry doll, my darling," coming in, and everything he says, even the prose, is rhythmic verse. And then there's Goldberry's Rain Song. I was wondering if that inspired Led Zeppelin's Rain Song. And then there's the song of the Barrow Wight too. And I think, you know, maybe Tolkien's trying to embed within the Lord of the Rings some echo of his creation myth, the music of the Ainur, in these 3 chapters. But when I first read this, of course, at 9, none of this was apparent to me. But what was, and I remember the feeling of this very clearly, one of the first strong impacts that the book had on me was a sudden sense of really, really deep time being evoked. More effectively for me than when Gandalf gives quite detailed histories in the second chapter, Shadow of the Past. It's when Tom talks about the little kingdoms fighting little kingdoms, and the green mounds being raised and the stone circles on them, and then he conjures this vision for them of a line of figures walking across a plain, and that one at the end had a star on his brow, you know. And I found and find that hugely evocative. Have I got time to say more, or do we have to wrap?
Oh, no, we're good.
So I think that Bombadil works on an artistic level, beautifully. And there are other reasons why. And I think he works on a creative level for Tolkien, because it's my belief that Bombadil is Tolkien's attempt to rework the primal Adamic figure of Vainamoinen from the Finnish Kalevala, a mythological, poetic cycle that hugely inspired him, because Vainamoinen is the first human, and lives right through the sequence of stories, and is constantly using song as his means of power over the world.
Yeah.
So,
And
Jason, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just quick. I got in a Twitter discussion about this. Is Tom Bombadil or Treebeard older? Because Bombadil says he's the oldest, but I wondered if there's like a correct answer to this, because it turned into a debate, and I just realized I just took him seriously.
Yeah, I think Tolkien's trying very hard with a lot of the time to actually maintain unanswered questions, and having two figures of apparent absolute authority saying contradictory things is one way of doing that. We could, I don't know, maybe find that one is saying the eldest in some special sense and the other is saying it in a different special sense. In the Silmarillion, Yavanna says that the trees sang to Ilúvatar in the music of the Ainur. So maybe in some way the Ents go back that far, and Bombadil does not. Bombadil remembers the first acorn, that he seems to be strictly an earth creature, despite the possibility of categorizing him as a Maya, a lesser member of the same ultimate order as the Valar. I think Tolkien was going out of his way to resist categorizing Bombadil like that, or it would have been such an obvious and easy thing for him to do in the Silmarillion.
You heard it here, Jason, when you come back to listen, and other Bombadil haters. John Garth says that Tom Bombadil belongs in The Lord of the Rings as an artistic choice and as a bringer of depth and realness to the Legendarium. John, so Trip has blessed me with the last question for you, and I'll make it a fun one here. For if you plan on watching the Rings of Power, what are the thing that you're looking forward to, and maybe one thing that you're scared about the show?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I'm perhaps one of those people who I don't feel like I need the show. I know if I'd have been a teenager and this was coming, wow, but I've got my head so thoroughly in the books and in Tolkien's life that one of the things I'm worried about inevitably is lots of viewers thinking that Tolkien invented all of the stuff that's going to be in that series, because there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that's not invented by Tolkien. There has to be. It's based on a very small amount of Tolkienian writing. But let me try to take your question in the spirit intended. Hi. I am really hoping that they do the downfall of Numenor in the way that I have it in here. And I am fearful. What am I fearful about specifically? I'm a bit worried about the names, because from what I've seen of the names they've chosen for the characters, they haven't taken the kind of care that I would expect them to take and Tolkien would have taken. So what I'm thinking of names, the character's called Theo. There's a character called Bronwen. Bronwen sounds a bit Grey Elvish, but it's actually a Welsh woman's name. and Theo, well, that's Greek, you know. So I don't know whether this fits into some system where they're producing, you know, using European languages to stand for certain languages in Middle Earth that Tolkien doesn't portray, because after all, he used Old English and Old Norse to stand for the languages of Rohan and the dwarves. Or on the other hand, maybe they're just being a bit slapdash and picking out names they like, and that would disappoint me.
Yeah, no, I've heard people talk about that even with the Harfoots, you know, with Tolkien connecting names to landmarks for the hobbits and things like Brandyfoot and things like that. Not really fitting for the time, but
yeah.
Well, I am like beyond thrilled we got to hang out with you, John. I really appreciate your work, and you know, it's always when you get to talk to someone you've only imagined talking to and reading them, it's quite a thrill. Your lecture was awesome, but it was a real blast to get to the talk and you know, get to pick up more of your wisdom on Tolkien.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem, Nick. Any final words here?
No, I mean, you know, John, just echo what Tripp said. It's been a blast hanging out with you and gleaning some more of your Tolkien knowledge. But like I said, just a promotion for you. I mean, some of the things John talked about with the Kalevala and things. If you want to learn more and go deeper, pick up the Great War, pick up the Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you.
Thank you both, and it's been really great talking to you.
Awesome. See you later, John.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, John.
All right. That was awesome. Oh, yeah. How you doing, Nick?
Dude, I am honestly in a different dimension right now. Like, I think I'm actually in. I think I might have transported to Tom Bombadil's little house. I think I'm hanging out with Goldberry. Like, I think she's knocking at my door right now.
All right. Watch out. Well, that was tons of fun and a real treat. And I'm glad your beard was so on point today. And because, you know, you didn't want to disappoint John Garth with a poorly organized. How good was your beard? You know, people want to know. And I say, look, it's Doran level. That's the level of your beard play today, right?
Man, I mean, people have said so, and I think we've got some good stuff from John Garth. So I mean, it has to be at some level.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But yeah, so everyone that's here, thank you for hanging out. Tomorrow, we are talking with Tom because the internet died in the middle of talking to him last time. Remember, you can enter the giveaway, and you too can have these beautiful Folio edition Lord of the Rings. And yeah, feel free to send in questions. We saved all the ones that sent in for Tom last time. Those of you in the group, we'll put the audio and the video of this on the resource page. You can grab it with ease. And yeah, I think that's about it. Any final thoughts there, Nick? Anything I should have said we didn't say?
I mean, it's John Garth, and we only had an hour with him. I mean, there's too many things we probably both didn't get to say. So,
yeah, but we have to admit that him having multiple answers to the who do you want to go to Pound Town at the Prancing Pony with, Battle at Helm's Deep, and Journey to Mordor. That was
we didn't even get to his Lord of the Rings, his third age, but he was ready. He was like, you know what, first age isn't good enough. I need to get into the second and third age.
yeah. I love talking with people when you get to ask them about like the topic they spend their whole life becoming a master of. And when he started going like, oh, on these dates he developed this thought and stuff. It's like when someone asks me the wrong question about Whitehead, and I'm like, well, you know, he was an atheist, but then he was developing this concept around the science thing. And like you're like explaining where, like, at what point the question they asked could have been true, and, and they're like, yeah, it's not. That's thanks.
You gave too much. You gave me too much there.
I'm like, no, I was like, you don't understand. And then he's lugged out that his topic is Tolkien. Come on, yeah, he's got to be a lot cooler at parties if you're John Garth.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
No doubt.
You're like, hey, who here wants to talk about philosophy? Avoid it. Like, y'all know about them hobbits? I know a lot about it.
Right.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you for hanging out. Send in your questions and such for Tom, and we will have a good old time. Back to back Tolkien headery, if that's a word. I don't know.
Hell yeah, it is.
Yeah, Tolkien headery. Tolkien headery.